Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for coming tonight to this Zoom presentation. Britt Morgan Kirkwood is a 2009 graduate in the Department of Art at Beaver College and has spent over a decade since teaching internationally, most recently at the Shekou International School in China. She's an Apple Distinguished Educator and has spoken about integrating media and science in the art classroom in places like Berlin and Singapore. Britt was once also a very dear student in my art history lecture classes, and I could often tell that she was energized with a great interest and enthusiasm for art and its many connections to science. So today it is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you Britt Morgan Kirkwood.
Thank you, Dr. Graciano. I just want to say thank you to you and just some familiar faces that are here, some teachers that I love dearly who it's very early in the morning in Vietnam and just kind of across the world, and just having Dr. Graciano and Dr. Floyd here, teachers that really inspired me. In this is intimidating. My nerves just rose a little bit higher. But I'm so thankful to have you guys here tonight. And I hope that it's worth your while. This is originally intended for really any educator or art educator about to go into the field or practicing art educator to hopefully kind of inspire you and just kind of share my heart and my story. And yeah, just thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen, and Dr. Graciano, if you see if anything is not coming up, just let me know. Sorry, I'm trying to move. Oops, sorry guys. Just having a little bit of trouble. That's okay. This can stay there. Was that something? Sorry, no, I could hear something. I didn't know if someone was trying to tell me they couldn't see. So we're all good? Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I am going to just kind of briefly introduce myself to you guys. For those of you who don't know me, thank you for being here. I find best practice with students for sure is to let them know you and build rapport with them and let them know who you are. And so since you're taking an hour out of your evening, I hope you have a nice glass of wine or tea or coffee to enjoy. I hope that this is worth your time, and just know I really, really, really appreciate it. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background so you know where I'm coming from. So I was a student at the University of South Carolina. I actually came in as a biology major and took an art class because I really missed doing art. I did art in high school. And thought, okay, I'm going to do this just while I'm in college. And the very next semester, I switched to art education, and I'm so thankful that I did. From there, my first teaching job was right out of school. I accepted a job at Wando High School in Mount Pleasant. And so it's a huge public high school, like 4,000 students. And so I had that really incredible experience, a really dynamic art team there. And Lucy Beckham was the principal. I feel the need to shout her out. Very inspirational leader. Then I moved. I was kind of seeking adventure. I knew I wanted to live overseas at some point, and I heard a lot about international schools that I didn't have to go and teach English. I could actually go and teach visual arts. So I ended up at Shekou International. And I just want to note that when I went there, my first 3 years there, I was in the primary, and my last 3 years there, I was in the secondary. So I kind of moved across as that position became available. And then I fell in love with an Australian, and we went to Australia for a year, took a year off, roamed around. And when we were getting back in the international circuit, it was actually Atlanta International that wanted to recruit both of us. My husband's also a teacher. So that's how we ended up here. But I just had our son about 6 months ago. So I'm currently home. So lots of time for reflecting about what I wanted to say as I've just been holding a sweet little babe for the past 6 months. One thing that I think kind of opened this door and kept me connected with Dr. Graciano and just some other amazing friends that are here with us tonight is I really encourage you, those of you, if you're teaching or thinking about teaching, about to be teaching, to really pursue any professional learning community you can be a part of, even if you don't think it pertains to you or art education. I was going to Readers and Writers workshop conferences. I was participating in math conferences when they would happen at our school, just out of curiosity if they were free. I wanted to check them out. And through that, I started to develop this professional learning network and was able to present in all of the countries that you see here. It was a really amazing opportunity to be able to travel and go to these different conferences and share what my students were doing. This photo is actually of me sharing about some pretty special students of mine at a conference with Apple in Berlin. So just to be able to take your classroom around the world because you're willing to do some crazy things is pretty awesome. So I highly recommend that. The loves of my life, I just thought I should share too, that I've always loved drawing. I've always loved science. And those have kind of meshed together. My work as sort of scientific illustration, some large scale on wood. It morphs and changes all the time. We'll talk about that a bit later. But my husband is a big inspiration in my life. He's an incredible educator. He's actually on here tonight. I'm not looking at him because he'll make me nervous. But he is heavily invested. He's an engineer turned ed tech guru turned kind of maker design teacher. And he inspires me all the time. And then our son is, of course, Oscar. So I wanted to kind of give you just who I am before we jump in. But for my art educators, this talk is ultimately for you. So hopefully those people who aren't able to be here tonight will get to watch it at a later time and enjoy it, because there are lots of times that you sit in meetings, and I know any specialist teacher feels this way, where what's happening around you is not for you particularly. So this is totally geared as a big shout out, love letter to my art educators. And in some ways, it is when Dr. Graciano and I talked about doing this for the first time, I really wanted to make it something of all the things I always wanted to say and all the things that I wanted to say to the other people, the other educators like me. So before we move any further, I think that this is a hugely important part that you have to accept moving forward, is that art is absolutely not a talent. I think to be an art educator, you have to accept this. I know that there are definitely students who are naturally inclined who will, shock you with their ability. But I think we have to believe and accept that art is just working your bum off all the time. And I know that because in high school, I was not extraordinary in the least. I was not a very talented student. I just enjoyed it. I loved it so much. And my art teacher, he told me, Dr. Russell Jewell in Easley, South Carolina, he said, Britt, if you want to do this, all it's going to take is some really, really hard work. And if you don't give up, if you practice drawing every single day, you will get better. And it changed my life. The next thing that I want us to accept before we move on is just, this is a big thing in education right now. Research continually points to this no matter what subject we're looking at, but whoever is doing the making is doing the learning. Please do not make your art classroom by trying to prove yourself or prove your validity by doing worksheets and tests all the time. There might be a place for that here and there, but truly let kids make things, let them explore with their hands, let them create. That is our intention as art educators. Also, just a little bit about the format I'm going to use. You will see some screenshots of my Instagram account as we go through tonight, because I want you to know that I practice what I preach, and these are actual experiences that I have had and I have done, and you can see how that played out. You can look back at them and see how it came about or things that spun off from that. And also, we're going to talk more about this a little later, but I really strongly encourage you to share your practice on this sort of platform if possible. We'll talk about student privacy and all of that in just a moment, but this using social media to meet students where they're at, especially today's students, has radicalized my practice as a teacher more than almost anything else. So I titled this The Unsolicited Advice from a Disobedient Art Teacher, but I want to just note that I want you to practice some civil disobedience. that this is, I'm not telling you to go against everything your administration says or anything like that. Go to lunch duty, get your work done, work with your standards, get your curriculum in the database that they want you to have it in, but actually be disobedient to mediocrity, be disobedient to going with the flow and creating cookie cutter lesson plans and doing the same thing every year in your classroom. Be disobedient to boredom, be disobedient to that your classroom should look like every other classroom in the school. It should not. That is not our role in education. Otherwise, they would call us something different. We are visual art educators. So I've kind of broken this tonight's talk down into just some little snippets, and I'm just going to watch time. I want to be super respectful of your time. So if I start to talk quickly, maybe just jump in there with me. But these are things that I think are so, so important if you want to make your classroom magic, and or some things that have made it magical for me. So make craftsmanship matter. Give all students the capacity to create to their highest potential. And here's what I mean by that. Even if you're like, when I was at Wando High School, public high school, that was huge in South Carolina, you can teach kids to create work that is fine art. Be disobedient to the fact that people think students can't create fine art, or that it's not important to push a work to completion to fine art. The pieces like this are actually made, these were made from toilet paper. I actually stole out of the bathroom, rolled around in some glue, and I bought one tube of black oil paint to antique. So many of these little pieces we made on cardboard, and these were actually inspired by maps. So you can push kids. Don't use budget as an excuse. Challenge yourself. You are creative and smart enough to push back on that and give students something to work with. I also really believe that if you give students the ability to, oh, I'm sorry, guys, I'm just gonna glance at my notes, that technique really matters. If this is a grade 3 project, and so many people said a 3rd grader did that, and I'm like, well, of course they did. I strongly encourage you as an art teacher to scaffold. And I have a lot of primary teaching, a lot of friends who have students in primary school, who have children in primary school. And guess what? Primary parents like to throw art away because they don't have a space for it. Sometimes projects just walk away and go missing because parents can't keep all of this. So my encouragement to primary art teachers is to, you do have to create storage in your room, but let lessons build on lessons, and let them go home with 2 or 3 incredible strong pieces a year than feeling like you have to churn out something every single week. Give them the time and space to create and be diligent. So you teach watercolor technique one week, you teach Zentangle technique the following, and allow those skills to build, and they'll really surprise you. I have found that pen work, when kids are given the ability and time to create pen work, students that are not interested at all in art take an interest and start pushing themselves further and further. They get really excited about what they can do just through practicing these simple things. Some of these 2 examples I just wanted to show. My student Jerry, when he was in grade 5, he was very reluctant in his skills of art, but this piece probably took us 5 or 6 weeks of coming to art class, but we remained diligent in that. And he created this piece that he was super proud of in the end. So again, I just feel, I see, yeah, we don't get much time with them, especially in the primary, but if you are willing to scaffold and build on those projects, I promise you'll see some really cool things, or at least I did. I wanted to share my student Vedant's piece because Vedant was in grade 10. Because of the way electives worked at Sheko International, he had not been in an art class since he was in primary school. And at that point, it was kind of a craft-based art class. So he really came in very intimidated. He didn't feel like he had much skill, but he continued to work and build and work and build. And when he produced this portrait that was about 18 by 24, in the end, he was so proud, and every other student in the class was so proud of him. Don't leave those students behind. Don't just accept that, okay, they don't have talent. Every child can do this. It's just going to look different as you scaffold and build those skills. They can learn to do this. In that same vein, so I want you to be disobedient to the fact that, oh, sorry, guys, I'm just looking at that every child cannot be an artist. And I think so much of that, and just like we were saying, make craftsmanship matter, that if you trust the process, most of the time in the art classroom, it's just having the right materials and the right tools to teach them to do this. So I wanted to show you, I'm really, really passionate about drawing because it's such a foundational, it's like teaching kids to read. It's such a foundational core thing to branch off in even if they're going to work in sculpture, 3 dimensions, in animation, any sort of media, they really need to have those basic drawing skills. So it's become a real passion of mine perhaps because I used to feel like I could not draw, and I learned. Um, a little different to that, if there is a struggle, Marie really, really, really always struggled when we did 2D art. But here in grade 6, when we were kind of fusing animals together and making these creature busts that were going to hang on the wall, Marie absolutely soared. Paper mache was her jam. So of course, you guys know this, but vary those medias within your classroom. And you'll see just a really great reward. And Marie could have left art feeling like, oh, I can't draw, I'm not an artist. And instead, she started to create things like this. Same thing here when he really hated drawing, hated contour line. Why are we doing this, Miss Kirkwood? This is terrible. Why are we doing this? And then when I handed him wire and pliers and he started to do a contour line drawing with wire, Simon created his own pieces that were his own. And it was really, really a special moment to see a grade 8 boy then super excited to keep recreating pieces in wire. So don't be afraid of varying that media. But further to that, I just strongly recommend drawing exercises like crazy, whether it's starting your year off with them or scaffolding it to where you spend a whole year in one of your courses just working on drawing techniques. So Alfredo here, again, super doubted his ability, was a huge perfectionist, would throw things away. I gave him a yardstick and taped a Sharpie to the end, the exercise you saw in the first image. And this is what he did because he got out of his own way and he was able to start to see. So definitely there's tons of research out there. It even became contour line drawing is something that if you don't know about it or you don't know how to teach it, tons of YouTube videos. It radicalized how I draw and it radicalized how my students draw. I really believe that I see sometimes the gridding may work, but I think that's more reserved for if you're doing a Chuck Close lesson. When you can teach kids that they can actually draw, it changes the game in your art room. It may take some time to convince them. I wanted to recommend Sketchbook School. It's tagged here on my Instagram. They have some awesome ideas like, you know, you have 1 minute to draw the apple, 1 minute to add watercolor, and we take a bite and move on. Students engage in that because they can't overthink it because it's so quick. I recommend having them draw for life whenever you can. Usually there's a yoga teacher in the area looking to or is happy to do some modeling for a small fee. But I think if that's not something you can do at your school, turn a bicycle upside down and have a go and get that figure drawing in a different way. And this is another exercise where students have just a very brief time to do a gesture drawing of the bike so they don't overthink it. And then they spend the remainder of the class going over and grabbing those details. And I've seen this produce those same sort of learning skills as figure drawing would. One of my favorite things to do with older students is to give them a pen or a skewer and ink and a piece of bread and make them meticulously draw all the openings in the bread because they famously will say to me, I can't draw, I can't draw, I can't draw. And I'm like, well, you just drew this. And it's incredibly complicated. And explaining that our brains create symbols and we start to simplify our drawings. And that's when we feel like we can't draw. So that's a really fun one to do. Again, contour line drawing, I've just seen it really be pushed to a point that these are students that really benefited from doing that and started drawing in a really different way, but not just on the high school level. This is my student, Evan, who really, really struggled. He was a little baseball player. He had zero interest in art, but he kind of became my little buddy and started to trust me. And that contour line, his parents and I were so proud. They couldn't believe that Evan had done this piece when we gave it to them. And he collaged some of his writing on top. It was a really, really cool piece that he was able to create in the end there. Another piece of advice, and I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but another piece of advice that I would like to give you guys is to give them an audience. So in this case, be disobedient to the 4 walls of your classroom. this is going to build their esteem and their capacity in a way I can't even explain. I'm excited to talk to you guys about this one. So what I have found over and over is sharing on social media. I just quickly want to say that I know some people are intimidated by this because of student privacy, and I totally get that. If you're at a public school in the States, generally students will sign something with the school at the beginning of the year saying whether or not they can be in publications. And generally it's only very few students that don't. But if you don't even want to worry about that, just don't show any of their faces, only show their hands working on their art or the pieces that they're working on. In this case, this would have been a little bit different with my student Bailey because it is a photograph of her in her artwork. But I think there are ways and means around that because the connection power is huge. When my students inevitably start following my school Instagram account, Morgan Student Art, and they start to see strangers and people commenting on their work, it is a very, very, very cool feeling. Also, just their responses to it, to me, is pretty cool. Something a parent shared with me too is that, you know, it's really amazing when you start to put students' artwork up and they start to develop that self-esteem, and especially like young girls who are using Instagram and things like that to just post pictures of themselves, sometimes not in the best way, that all of a sudden that shifts and they start sharing their artwork. The power in that to me is pretty huge because it's almost like you'll see, I don't know if many of you are in the classroom right now, but teachers are wary to broach that, that, oh no, we can't be on social media. We can't interact with them on social media. Yes, there are boundaries for sure, but if we're not modeling this to them of what's appropriate and how to use it for good, who is? And the answer to that is no one. No one is modeling that for them. All they're seeing and what they're consuming is a completely different thing that we don't have to go into right now, but I just strongly encourage you to give them that audience outside of your room. Further to that, I would say that on a more physical scale, obviously not during a pandemic, is to give them an art show. Every year, make the art show at your school one of the biggest deals. Now, this year was pretty unique that I was able to raise some money through gift cards with their artwork on it, that we were able to rent this gallery space. They worked with us for a very cheap price. And I was there for days and days hanging a show that only got to hang up for, I think, 4 days. But it was incredible, the response. And this was actually a primary show, but I have done art shows in empty apartments. I have done art shows in lunchrooms. Just have an art show. In fact, dress up, make them dress up, give your seniors flowers, create paper invitations that they take home and hand out. Make this an event like I see so many performing arts students get to do and our athletes get to do, but very rarely do visual arts students have that opportunity. And I have to say, by the time I left Sheko International School, our art show was one of the most, and this is just in the walls of our school hallway, with some partitions at the end. By the end, it took over the school and you walked through the whole school the night of the art show. And it was one of the most well-attended events at our school. And it became super special to all of us, my colleagues and dear friends. Always made a big deal about it. It was a great night. So I encourage you that, because then their esteem just grows and they want to create more. And when you see an adult placing value and walking through like a real gallery of your work, I imagine, I didn't have that at their age, but I imagine what that felt like at their age would be pretty rad. So this one kind of goes to what I just talked about, giving them an audience, but also connecting them to the world. So in that social media thing, one time I spoke, when I was speaking in Berlin, I made something that was tweeted out, which was funny that this was what was pulled out of my entire speech, but I just said, there are more artists than dead white guys from Europe. And although art history is so important, sometimes we only focus on that and we don't focus on the living. And so this affected my classroom so much that I wrote a little book about it, and some dear friends helped me put it together. This was not a solo work, but anyways, if you want to check it out, it's available for free download on iTunes. And it just will go into this a little further extent. But the short version is, one day my second graders were working on Flowers by Lily Wallace. She's a South Carolina artist. She's kind of blowing up in Charleston. And we tagged her in a post, and you see here, commented love. And my kids were like, literally, they said to me, she's alive. And I thought, how telling is that they thought all artists were dead, that they could not believe that this woman was alive. So that was pretty special. And then Amira Ra, when we were doing some abstracts in grade 6, she commented as well. Very similar reaction. She also wanted the dinosaur costume that was being worn that day. But a similar reaction happened. And this is an excerpt from my book, but the real game changer was when we were studying Banksy and we were doing spray paint techniques, and he liked one of our posts and commented, and it was like a rock star walked into my art classroom. They were blown away because they knew kind of he has this really cool, well, you know, he's cool. He's a cool guy. So they felt really amazing that he had seen them. And further to that, probably one of the most dramatic interactions my students had was with Heather Hansen, who's based out of New Orleans. And when I tagged her in a post, she actually took it, put it on her Instagram, blogged about them, interacted with them over the course of many years, to when those same children that were in grade 5, I kind of moved with them to the high school. My last year there, they decided to do performance art piece in the base of the school with all of their peers and everyone around during our art show. So that kind of rapport with her really empowered them, an artist that I alone couldn't have done. So connect your students, share their work. This is also a pretty powerful moment. My student Tita, she created this piece and is so quiet, so meek, so humble. But the moment I put it on Instagram, teachers, her peers coming up to her, telling her how incredible it was. And she comes to me and she's like, thank you so much. I didn't think it was, you know, just so hard on herself. And I just remember that conversation thinking, wow, like, because as her art teacher, she thinks I'm just saying it. Other people say it to her and she believes it. And lastly, that also created, I think, a dear friend from abroad from Sheco International School is on this, but my friend Nikki one day said to me, can I buy any of their work, like prints of their work? I know their parents probably want it, but she inspired us to, we actually jumped on Society 6, created a platform for the students to put, you could sell bags. I don't know if you're familiar with this platform. And then with the profits that they made, it cuts out the middleman. I didn't really have to worry about it. I went to them at the end of the year, any kid that had something on here, and said, this is the money that you made. What do you want to do with it? What service learning are we investing in this year? And they would pick a service learning group from our school that they wanted to support and give that funding to. And I thought that was really cool because usually students don't have their own money to work with, even if they have money at home that parents can give, or even if parents do baked goods for a bake sale, that's still coming from the parents. So giving them that agency was pretty radical and fun. So connect them. Also, the next one I want to say, collaborate. Be disobedient that art doesn't belong everywhere. Be disobedient to the fact that your colleagues may not think art is important or a core subject. Doesn't matter. Get outside of your classroom, work with people every time you can. I want to shout out just little shout outs. I know they may not be here, but just people that this happens in just organic conversations. Friends that are English teachers say, hey, we're doing podcasts. Would you be interested in teaching a cover? And I just had kind of committed to myself, I'm going to say yes to collaboration. And I said yes, but I didn't make it not fit with my curriculum. I used that to then talk about collage, talk about font, talk about color theory. They created a piece based on the title of their work, and that became the cover of their podcast that year. This is a really fun one. Our Early Learning Center, we actually had this on base, both at Atlanta International and Sheco International. The little 3-year-olds created a piece of artwork and an older student had to recreate it larger and in a new media. So this is an example of one going from marker to acrylic, really large. And when we displayed these all together, the 3-year-olds were pumped. And that was a really exciting day for the 4th graders and as well to see that. simple things like collaboration doesn't have to be huge or go outside of your curriculum. We were doing self-portraits and printing off some writing, like portraits, we're talking about them being very personal. How are they different from a selfie? What can they tell us about a person? And they started collaging their writing into their works. And actually, the next year, this is as honest as I can be, my colleague Ceci came to me for the same podcast project. She's like, but this year they're doing this, I believe, statements. And I said, oh, Ceci, I really don't have time. But since they're so personal, why don't we just do a font lesson? We'll talk about font and color scheme. And they used their self-portraits they had already created as their podcast covers. That's a really small collaboration, but it was still there. It was still a connection for them that they also created, the tile that people would see for their podcast. And we were able to hang them up around school with a QR code, and people could go and listen to the podcast connected to the portrait. So even when you run out of time, there's still a way. If you want to do figure drawing, but you can't afford a model, it's not in the budget, it's not in the time, you don't want to worry with that, go into a PE class, make friends with your PE teacher. They'll let you come in. My friend Carlos and Mark let me come in, and my students photograph athletes in action. And some of them turned them into final pieces. Some of them just did them as gesture drawing or charcoal studies, but it was an awesome way to look at figures in motion. So just some simple collaborations there. Computer science, if anyone was at my STEAM workshop today, my friend Joyce said, Britt, we know these simple machines to see what's inside so the computer science students can see how they work, but then there's just so much waste. Can you think of anything we could do with it? So we used kind of the Japanese way of organizing, knolling, and we glued them on canvases with building adhesive, and they became installations in our IT office that people loved. So you can get very creative with recycled materials and make those connections for kids. This is still, as you see, collaboration continued, but I felt like STEAM, I'm going to do this quickly in case anyone was in my workshop earlier today, but STEAM is kind of a separate thing. If you don't know, at the moment, STEAM is a huge push in our education system to see more students in careers of science, technology, engineering, and math. And they actually included the arts in that just a couple years ago. So I won't go into all my theoretical reasons as to why that was a really smart move to do that. But when you're able to collaborate with science, you can do medical illustrations. That was super fun. Just use it as a drawing, hatching, cross hatching. We did some cracking varnish on the top, botanical illustrations, entomology. It keeps you fresh as a teacher too. If you're teaching drawing over and over, this actually gives you different subject matter to work with. It's a challenge for you, and that's when you stay fresh, and you'll find that your teaching, for me, my teaching was better in that case. Here is just an example of, we just drew microorganisms, really small, recycled some old Petri dishes from the science department, poured some gel medium on top, and we had this awesome installation that made people talk about microorganisms for months. It was pretty great. Cyanotype printing, letting them collect things and experiment themselves, using digital media to create fabric. So this was created on a program, Procreate or Adobe Draw. And these lines then were printed onto fabric, and then we used Tinkercad to create some 3D printed jewelry. Most schools have gotten grants through STEAM or the National Science Foundation to have access to a 3D printer. So if it's something that you want to do, I think it can be pursued. But a lot of cities like here in Atlanta, and I know that your library, because a dear friend of mine is a librarian there, the public library in Columbia is one of my favorite places. My friend Phil there is a STEAM, I guess they would call it a maker space, open to the public there that you could probably source some of these designs from. So there's just a few more of those. So definitely working with technology in that vein. This is a little bit of everything. My friend Corinne Takara, she looks at sustainable art materials and how much waste goes into design and art materials. And she's actually using here, she did a workshop with my students of they're creating lamps, but from silkworms. And the idea that you leave the silkworm there and it will continue to kind of build its web on this structure you've created. Follow her right now tonight if you do nothing else. Corinne Takara is brilliant. She also taught us about sustainable materials using things like kombucha leather, seaweed, fruit leather in work to create a more sustainable art piece. Pretty cool stuff. Also, in the vein of engineering, checking out Theo Jansen's work, Strawn Beast, my students built this little model of his work, but they look him up tonight if you're not familiar. He creates these engineering masterpieces of sculptures that move and live and thrive on the beach. It sounds weird. It is crazy to see in person. I think you would really enjoy it. Of course, with STEAM, we've got easy wins of making art bots, robots that create marks that maybe the humans could not. But I encourage you when you do that, a lot of even science teachers will do that lesson now, but have the students have an intent behind it to go back over what their art bot creates, and either this is a still life drawing of the actual parts of their art bot, or maybe something that they really love about science. So this student actually, Tiffany, let her art bot make a background, and then she drew something that she thought was really beautiful. Connecting to math. So again, I'm still talking about like collaboration with other subjects and STEAM under that umbrella. I know I've kind of been on that for a while, but collaboration is very fun for me. But just having some fun with Spirographs. Did anyone have one of these as a child? Super fun to see, let them see how graphing and meticulous number to number can actually create really beautiful designs. I found that that was really helpful when we started looking into Heather Hanson's work of how our bodies can actually function as mathematical, like the measurements don't change when we extend, if we extend in the same way, doing some synchronized drawing, tons of connections with math. So collaborate, set that one aside. The next thing I would like to encourage you to do is build for your community. Be disobedient that the school does not belong to you or that your school is not an art gallery. I think this works in two ways. I think you can create pieces intentionally for intentional places in school, but it's also not just you as art teachers. I try to encourage my colleagues as well to put their art outside of their work, outside of the classroom as much as you can, not only for the audience aspect, but what it can do for your school community. So simple examples of that is just when you're creating, these were those sculptures that I mentioned earlier. At the end, we again ran out of time before the art show and they were all left white. We didn't have time to paint them. So we hung them up on this wall, and the principal actually came to my students and said, can this actually stay up till next year? And you guys take them home next year because it just looks so cool. So I was going to encourage you when your students create like work, hang and group them together. Same when we were studying radial symmetry in nature. We then just hung the canvases up on the science hallway. I think every science teacher stopped in to tell the grade 7 students how cool these pieces were, and make that connection. We were doing some performance art with recycled materials about conservation, and rather than throwing them away when we were done, we let this hang in our hallway as a symbol of what we had created and could remember all year. So just when you're doing these projects, like individual student works or not, that they're eventually going to take home or throw away, put them outside of your classroom, let people see them. Students, when they created their insects, they decided to group them together and make their own specimen board. And then eventually we pulled them off and they all took them home, glued them on new paper. But this was a pretty cool idea with grade 7. So that's kind of just like you make work in your class, put it up. Then I encourage you as the art teacher, art educator, to create intentional pieces for school. So my second graders at this point, it's a primary lesson, they were creating abstracts by overlapping their body shapes and using color schemes to create these abstract paintings. And we really needed a space. We really needed some art on the campus. So I threw out this wood canvas and I said, okay, if you're done early or you're waiting on something to dry, your job is to take one of your colors and to go paint a shape on the big one as well. And I had 4 second grade classes, so it did not take very long out of my classroom. And then we had this was actually a huge piece. I think it was like 8 foot by 4 foot, that hung, I think, as far as I know, it is still at our school, this really fun abstract piece that they could walk by and be proud of. And it really livened up our school community. Similar to that with older students, I just want to say if they want to do a mural, encourage them to do it on a piece of wood, so that one, they can work on it like this, and it's a little bit easier to fix mistakes. You can move it out of the way as you're working. But then when schools get renovated and walls are being rearranged, or classrooms, like there's always renovations happening in the summer, these pieces can stand the test of time because they're just moved, taken down off the walls get the fresh coat of paint. And so as far as I know, this is still there from my sophomores and juniors from several years ago. This was a fun one. Anytime you can use recycled materials, I did this with kindergarten. I was actually approached and worked with the primary school teacher at Atlanta International. We had a huge new foyer that needed some intentional artwork. It was just bare and it didn't look like kids came to learn there at all. And so we collected recycled toys the kids were going to throw out, talked about waste, talks about conservation and plastics. And the kindergartners sorted them into colors, and we ended up gluing them down with building adhesive and tacky glue and grouping them by colors and hanging them up. These were massive pieces that still are in the foyer of the school when you walk in, and suddenly it looked like a really interesting, fun place to learn. And we would always hear the kids talking about which toys they had at home or which toys were theirs. Let early learning students make a mess. And again, we needed some work, and there was some empty spaces and that we wanted to fill. And I thought, let's do this with like the youngest artists we can. So we had a day where all of their parents hated me because they destroyed the clothes they had on, but you can see we tried. And after they dried, we then threw paint back on top of them, folded them, talked about symmetry. And now they hang in like these serious office spaces where, the big wigs of the school come in to have these meetings about school, but there's no evidence that children have ever entered that room. And just how inspiring it is to look over and remember, okay, we're doing this for the 3-year-olds that actually made this really cool piece of art. That's why we're here making these decisions. But also have students create things that matter. This was just at a tricky time in our school, and there was lots of change and things going on. And a senior came to me and she said, can we do something? And of course you have people, when you have interactive art like this on your campus, some people will not always treat it properly, but for the most part, kids will really enjoy engaging in it at school. So window clings, or even doing things on portable dry erase boards that kids can interact with is pretty fun. Last year for Black History Month, I had a black canvas set up, and each student came in and we talked about the repression of people and how that had happened, and why we were celebrating Black History Month. And we kind of unpacked some things together, and kids came up one at a time and chose a color that represented them and dotted it on the board as a commitment to, hey, we're going to make sure that this repression doesn't happen again. And it's really cool and powerful here in Atlanta, the birthplace of the civil rights movement. So at the end, when we peeled the vinyl letters I had hidden on the canvas off, we had this quote then that we got to hang in the school and remember that we made this piece together. Similarly, and again, I want to be really respectful of time. So the rights of the child, we actually created pieces that would, as an international school, you're meant to have the UN rights of the child posted. And so we did it in this really fun way, kind of a throwback to folk art. And then kids assigned grade levels, and they all signed that they understood what this right meant. And now that hangs in the school, but the kids have ownership of it, that they know the rights that they have as children. And then have them do installations that matter. So a lot of these, they can happen in the classroom, they can happen outside. We announced at an assembly, if you want to be a part of kind of an anonymous art piece. I worked with my friends Corey and Jacinta to create just kind of anonymous quotes about microaggressions of how students identified through race. And this was a really stirring exhibition at our school to have our middle schoolers and high schoolers then walk by this every day and say, wow, like I didn't know my Black friend felt that way. I didn't know my French friend felt that way. I didn't know my Caucasian friend felt this way. So it's really an interesting kind of, and these are the pieces that matter. So next to that, though, they created this really powerful piece where they came in after they gave these quotes and they painted a wooden hand as close to their skin tone as they could. And then those cards hung next to it saying, "This I believe," statements about the power of unity and loving each other for who we are. So that impact was there, and just to create conversation for our students to start these conversations about what it is to love our brothers and sisters. So that was pretty cool piece. But what I want to offer about all of that, guys, and I know I'm sharing a lot, but I'm just trying to inspire you and show you, I know people are going to connect with different things, that then when you make yourself present in the community and the hallways of your school, then your teacher friends, your colleagues are going to see that and they're going to want to be a part of things. So my counselor friends, Lisa and Corey, saying like, let's do a mindfulness coloring wall in the counseling office. Or my friend Nikki's doing, let's do a teacher art class and coming along. My friend Ceci here doing batiking. So I would do these little after school once a month. We would do a teacher art class after school, and I would invite my colleagues to come in and learn something. And so then they're investing in my curriculum, I'm investing in theirs. We're talking about what's happening at school. More collaboration happens from there. Here's some teachers doing a figure drawing class after school one day in my tiny little classroom. It was awesome. And this evolved to the point that after 6 years, my colleagues were participating in the art show every year, and the students would run over to see what photography or what pieces their teachers had created in teacher art class. And it was just cultivating this really beautiful, creative community. And the most powerful one for me is just before I left China. It was a very hard goodbye. I invited any teacher that wanted to come in, and there's my students actually being the teachers that I made stay after school. And we taught them this simple stenciling technique where they, from a photograph, could stencil out the values, and they were a part of, teachers were also a part of this wall. So by the time I left, this hideous wall that we had destroyed outside, every student and teacher from our school was on this wall. And talk about community investment. This didn't belong to me anymore. This belonged to my whole school. This belonged to everyone that I worked with and everyone that I shared this building with. So much so that they even put it on the yearbook, because it was just such a powerful piece of that unified us as a group. And I'm coming to the end, so just a few more things if you stay with me. The final thing that I would encourage you to do as an art educator is to be an artist, to practice what you preach. I try and draw, I will admit, with a 6-month-old baby, it is not every day anymore, but to, be creating work yourself. You have to be a practitioner of what you're teaching these kids to be. And you will find, like, I work in this scientific illustration process, but I was teaching contour line drawing. They started doing these portraits and they pushed me. I did this piece of my husband actually just after he proposed. I created this piece of him and had so much fun, and it stretched me to do something different. And it's one of my favorite works now after I finished it. So your kids are going to turn around and be the teachers of you. I think sometimes there is this little bit of a stigma. I don't know if you guys have felt it, but when you're an art ed major, sometimes art studio people can be like, oh, okay, well, I'm an artist. That's all I am. And you're a teacher. But I find that that's not true. And we can break that. And maybe you haven't experienced it, but I absolutely think that being an artist makes me a better teacher, and being a teacher makes me a better artist. So I really, really encourage you to practice that civil disobedience, to be disobedient to mediocrity, be disobedient to, to being bored. This is be disobedient to not having passion in your classroom. I know that these are really weird times. I was very pregnant in this photo. I closed the year out with my students in quarantine on Zoom, but it did not affect us. We can still have this impact in kids' lives. And I know this is a really, really strange time to walk into education, and but it can be done, and you might be just a little bright spot reaching them. What's funny to me is the student that I wanted to talk about having to drag and pull through. If you look in the bottom picture, the door that's open there, That's the student I was actually going to speak about. And when I screenshot this, I didn't realize, but that was him. He was lost in online learning. It was not a good experience for him. He's a very sweet kid, but parents were writing to all of us all the time, like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But he was able to, in art class, really just express himself and have some fun in this really stressful environment. So I encourage you with that, if that's what you're walking into as a teacher. But at the end of all of it, I just encourage you to be an art teacher. I see so many people at conferences or just different art teachers that I've met who get really bitter and really burn out because they spend their time trying to be something else or to get their colleagues' approval or to show their colleagues, oh, I do as much work as you. And in fact, you know what? You don't have to prove that we matter. We know that we do. The arts, when you look at art history, there's no question that our validity in this world is there and it's present, and it's necessary. We document who people are as artists. I just kind of want to leave you a little bit with a quote. You know, we all hear this Pablo Picasso quote, you know, every child is an artist. Every child is born an artist. The problem is them remaining one once they grow up. It's something to that effect. And I find that what I've observed is that somewhere along the line, I think a teacher takes it away from them, or we make it not important. We make their artistry not matter. And if you've chosen this career, what I encourage you to do is to know that to children, you can really matter. And when they're empowered that what they create and make with their own hands, that's one of the greatest gifts, in my opinion, you can give a human being. So there are going to be bad days. There are going to be bad years, and there are going to be some things you have to sit through as a teacher that aren't always fun, but I promise that it has been very, very much worth it in my life. Like I said, I really want to be respectful of time, and I know I'm right on the end. So if you ever want to reach out to me through Instagram, send me a direct message if you want a lesson plan or you want to collaborate or you just have anything else you want to share. Please be in touch, because I'd love to see what this next kind of group of art teachers, or if you're already in the classroom, what you're doing with students. I know it would inspire me. That's where I thrive and that's where I'm challenged. So I just want to thank again you guys for being here today. My mouse is being a little bit weird, guys. I'm trying to log us out of the share. Let me just see. I'm so sorry about this. Okay. Now, there we go. So yeah, thank you so much for spending time with me tonight. And I just appreciate it so much. Dr. Graciano, I'll let you kind of facilitate from here of what our next steps would be.
Sure, yeah. We're happy to take questions, and those of you who may not have a microphone, you can certainly put your questions into the chat box.
Yay, this is so awesome. So good to see all of you. I'm getting a little emotional with some of the faces that I'm seeing here. So cool to see you all.
I would just like to say, Brittany, it's great to see you again, and thank you for presenting. It's nice to know what you've been doing, because a lot of times we have students in our classes and they move on and then that's it. And we just wonder, what are they doing now? So I see Caroline, I see Sarah, Anya, lots of former teachers, former students here. So it's really, and Louisa somewhere behind the camera.
So cool. Dr. Lloyd, I still reference tons of things. I have made probably every junior class that I've ever taught watch, like the political Dr. Seuss and Mickey Mouse Monopoly and things like that, just things from your class. So you carry on inspiring me.
Oh, thank you.
I really like to know what you were saying about giving your students an audience, particularly through social media, and having them connect to your social media site and where you're posting pictures of their artwork or them working in the classroom, and how they kind of respond to comments from the world, right? And and I wonder, has there ever been an issue where somebody has like made a negative comment or just like a terrible comment that had nothing to do with what was being shown? And how do you sort of talk through the students if they see that, or are you filtering that out?
that is an excellent point. I'm going to be as honest as I can be with you. I have never had that happen. It has never, to my knowledge, like ever happened. And even going back through really old posts, I don't know if y'all saw some of these, it said like 350 weeks ago or something like that. You know, I have not experienced that, but I do think that's something that I've tried to mentally prepare for. How I feel I would handle it in that case, and that's why I am the owner with it, and it has carried with me. It's not something that belongs to the school. Is for me, I would absolutely probably delete the comment immediately. Not if it was a critique in a positive way, like, oh, could next time you've tried, or I'd like to see your focal point stand out more. If it was like a growth point critique, I would try and work with that with the student and talk about what that looks like and model that with critiques in the classroom. But if it was like really negative or really crude, I would just delete the comment. I would let my administration know, just in case anyone did see it or whatever, and just go from there. I think that would be my course of action, because you really, yeah, that is a really valid point. If the student saw it before I was able to do that, it would definitely be a conversation with parents. But like I said, I have had an Instagram now for my art classroom for 7 years, and I have never experienced that. So I know I've been really lucky, but most of the time with the hashtags I'm using, art education, STEAM, stuff like that, it's generally teachers and students that are looking at it. So it has been, that's a great point. And if anyone else wants to talk about what they would do, I would like to learn from that as well. Sorry, I'm just reading, make sure I didn't miss any questions on the chat. Sorry, guys. Thank you guys so much.
I didn't put a question in the chat, but is it possible to ask you something quickly?
Of course.
I really enjoyed some things you said here and earlier today as well about how important it is, you know, collaboration outside of your specific content area, but also within your department as well. Have you been in any schools where you have faced the challenge of other teachers not, you know, being accepting or as willing to communicate, collaborate, and
I'm laughing because I'm like, yep. No, truthfully, not so much. I have been really lucky to work with some pretty passionate educators. What I would say to that is you don't have to collaborate with everybody, and nobody is making you collaborate. So collaborate with your wins. And if that makes other people want to come on board, you know, my friends Ceci and Nathan were go-getters. They'll collaborate with anyone. They pulled me in for, like, it was the first thing we worked together was the podcast thing. And then that kind of had some trickle effect. When they see and you get that visibility out there, other teachers will want to work with you. I think it's a really important balance that we don't do it in like this insecure way where we're trying to like insert ourselves, but the teachers that are open be like, hey, actually, we might talk about that in the art room. Would you mind if we, you know, if I kind of came alongside, or can I come sit in your science room and see how you talk about that? I would kind of like to do some microorganism drawings. And generally, because teachers, we crave affirmation and our administrators are spread so thin, and generally they're not coming in to observe us or give us feedback the way that we want, that I find that any colleague, and myself included, when somebody wants to come into your classroom, you want them to, generally, and you want to have that connection and you want to have that affirmation. So for me, that's kind of how it's worked. But with difficult colleagues, even in my art department, I just kind of, I pick my battles and I say, okay, that's not for you. That's fine. That's all right. And, but if it's something I really want to do, like if I really wanted to have a go at something and that the teacher from that subject wasn't supportive, or I wasn't being supported in the other subject, I'd just have a go anyways. And it might be really bad. But I do it. And then maybe next year they'd want to help me. Yeah, it's a great question, Blair. Thank you so much.
I think in higher education, at university level, we have some of the same problems as people in the arts and the visual arts, communicating with our colleagues in other departments, and particularly in the STEM fields, and you know, where it seems that we don't always feel as valued or as on as equal playing field with our colleagues in other parts of the university. And so we have a very sort of similar kind of struggle, and it's good advice to sort of to say, sort of to be confident in the idea that we matter and that we are a legitimate part of the humanities and liberal arts. But every once in a while, I also kind of want to push your agenda on them sometimes, and remind them in a not so subtle way, that we're here and this is what we do, and also we are interested in other things too. But we collaborate and we want to be interested in what they're doing. So we have very similar kind of conversations.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole like when they go low, we go high. Okay. Right. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So yeah, that's absolutely, because I have felt that, and I have seen what it does to teachers. Like I've just sat back and observed what that does to teachers when it festers and you start to feel unimportant. It just kind of breeds this animosity for one, but then burnout and like, why do I do what I do kind of thing. And I've definitely felt that from time to time, but I found that, I just think about the Sistine Chapel and I'm like, okay, like, like this is something that we're still talking about. Like it's that relevant. So that might be a poor example, but like art is here to stay and it's not going anywhere. And if you don't think it's important, then that's probably your ignorance, and I'm going to carry on. I'm speaking too much now, but that's kind of my mentality on it. Well, dude, guys, I really want to stay in touch. I hope, just know that your comments, do you guys mind if I take a quick screenshot? Those of you that don't have your cameras on, you don't have to turn them on, but just those of you that do, would you mind if I took a screenshot? Is that okay? I'd just like to remember this moment for myself, and thank you. Oh, there, wait, yes, got one more. That's a teacher. I'm going to call her out now because there are two teachers in here. Oh, and that little person there that just went away. That I would not be the same without. My friends Nikki and Ceci are in here, and they were in this presentation because I've collaborated with them for years. And that's the kind of relationships you build. And my family that's here as well. That's super awesome. So getting emotional, but thank you guys so much for a great night. It is 7:05. I know some of you are trying to eat dinner. Some of you are having breakfast. My friend Rebecca from Vietnam is here. And but Sarah, everybody that I recognize from school, so good to see you guys. Sending lots of love. And Dr. Graciano, if you have anything else, otherwise.
No, thank you so much. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Reach out on Instagram. I would love to stay in touch. Much love, guys. Thank you.